Hello, I'm Thomas Hare, Chief Content Officer of the Performance Driven Marketing Institute, a not-for-profit trade association that serves companies in the performance and direct-to-consumer marketing world. Welcome to the latest episode of Take 20, created by the PDMI's Brand Response Council. These 20-ish minute live conversations featuring leaders in the performance marketing world speaking about the hottest topics in the industry are scheduled twice a month. Before we get to today's conversation, a quick housekeeping note. We'll be addressing any questions from the audience at the end of today's session, but you don't have to wait to ask them. Utilize the questions tab on your control panel to type and send your question in. We'll collect them and we'll try to get to as many as possible in the final moments of the episode. Today, in the one-on-one conversation, Brand Response Council Chair and Take 20 host Chris Foster at Bottom Postcard welcomes Len Gordon, Chair of Venable LLP's Advertising and Marketing Group and a member of the PDMI Government Affairs Council. They're going to be discussing the latest news of note for performance and D2C marketing professionals regarding the shifting sands of consumer protection enforcement at the Federal Trade Commission under the second Trump administration. What's real, what's not, and what's next? Let's find out. Welcome, Len. Chris, take it away.
Thanks, Tom. Great to be here.
Yeah, fantastic. Really glad that you're here. And thank you so much, Len. Looks like my camera just went out.
And you had that great shirt on too.
That was hilarious. That was so crazy. It just went out. There we go. Okay, press the right button. Welcome in, Len. So glad you could be here. So, welcome 2025. 2025. If anyone hasn't noticed, there's a new political administration. There's been a few changes here and there, right? But especially as it relates to the shifting vision of the FTC, which is what we're going to be talking about. This shifting vision figures out how the FTC manages and engages consumers and within the industry. So what we're doing today is kind of a condensed version of the solo panel presentation that Len had prepared for the PDMI East. Decades of experience, the Government Affairs Council within PDMI. What he's able to do is to create a bridge between the PDMI members and then what's happening on the Hill in the Oval Office and even in the halls of policy. So I guess we'll start off with a big headline question, Len. Broadly, what would be the big headline of this version of Trump's agenda as it relates to the FTC?
Thanks, Chris. Great question. Part of the answer, I think, is we're still waiting and seeing. As with many things with the Trump administration, there's a lot of contradictions. There's a sort of a populist bent, and then there's also this anti-regulation bent, and those two things are somewhat in conflict. For example, one of the signature initiatives of the current FTC chairman is a workers' task force to look at issues affecting employees and workers across the Bureau of Consumer Protection, the Bureau of Competition, the Bureau of Economics. Not something we would typically think of as a conservative Republican agenda item, but it's one of the signature initiatives announced by FTC Chair Ferguson. There's a lot of talk about anti-regulation, but there's also been a lot of talk about strong enforcement of the laws that are on the books. So we're going to have to see how that plays out in particular. The FTC is clearly not going away. It's not going to be gutted the way the CFPB was, but there are changes. They're reducing its size. There have been rifts or at least efforts to get people to resign. The chair went up to the Hill and said, we've got too many employees. We need to cut our budget. Not something you see that saying very often in Washington. That's not great for morale. There's a lot of senior folks who, some of them have left already. Some of them are going to be leaving. That will change, I think, the speed at which the agency acts. But exactly where the rubber will hit the road, we're starting to see, but we're seeing a little bit of trends, but we don't, nothing definite yet.
That's so interesting, and I wonder if sometimes certainty, even if you don't like it, is better than uncertainty and kind of waiting for what's going to happen and not knowing. So that's going to be an interesting thing to take a look at, I guess, over the next year plus. But you talked about, going up to the Hill and looking at maybe reducing staff or looking at their staffing. So could you just tell us who in the administration is running the operations and what are some of the highlights of these folks that we should be paying attention to?
Well, the agency is different than it's been in its entire history. Congress created it as a bipartisan independent agency. The Trump administration believes there are no such thing as independent agencies. You're either part of the executive or you're not. And they believe the FTC is part of the executive. president has fired the 2 Democratic commissioners with no intention of replacing them with other Democrats. That's being challenged. That's probably going to end up at the Supreme Court. And it's quite clear that the contact and the sort of coordination with the White House and the FTC is much higher than it had been, I think, in prior administrations. And there's no someone from the other party dissenting to anything that the agency is doing, which is historically the way it hasn't been. So the current chair is Andrew Ferguson. He's from Virginia. He was the Solicitor General of Virginia. He worked for Senator McConnell. Very well accomplished lawyer, has talked a lot about being strong on law enforcement, that the agency's job is to enforce the laws, not to regulate. So under Chair Khan, under President Biden, there was a lot of effort and a lot of man hours spent trying to promulgate regulations. I don't think you're going to see that under Ferguson. Working with him, the other Republican is Melissa Holyoke. She was the Solicitor General of the state of Utah. She's conservative Republican. She's written and spoken a lot. She's out there a lot. She's, again, focused on enforcement, not regulation. Mark Mader is the last Republican, so you've now got 3 Republicans. He is the most recent appointee. He worked for Senator Lee from Utah for a while. He is the only one of the 3 Republican commissioners who actually worked at the agency previously. He's an antitrust lawyer. I don't think he's given a lot of thought to consumer protection issues before he got this job. But so far the 3 of them are voting in lockstep on everything. There hasn't been any signs of dissent between them. There's not a lot of dissent being tolerated generally in Washington these days,
right?
On one side of the aisle. And then the guy who's running the Bureau of Consumer Protection is Chris Mufarage. He's got some CFPB and CFTC experience. He worked previously for Commissioner Holyoke as her attorney advisor. He's towing the party line. They're going to be enforcing the laws, not issuing lots of regulations.
Sure.
So we'll see. They are on the cases that they're bringing. They're using things like ROSCA, the Restore Online Shoppers Confidence Act, to go after continuity or negative option billing in a very aggressive manner. I mean, they announced the case yesterday against a payment processor who was using a merchant of record model for software sales, antivirus software sales, one of the traditional areas the FTC doesn't like. And they pushed the bounds of ROSCA to name the payment processor under that, alleging that in this merchant of record model, which some businesses still use to process their payments, it's the processor, the merchant of record, not the underlying software seller, who's actually making the sale. So they're subject to ROSCA. I mean, that's aggressive, and that's something you would normally thought of seeing a Lena Khan administration, not a Ferguson administration, but where they are enforcing laws, they appear to be doing so aggressively. It's a little bit more challenging to figure out what the next case is going to be. I mean, one of the other areas that they certainly have been looking at is direct-to-consumer money-making schemes. They're trying to push the bounds, I think, of what constitutes a business opportunity. I don't think they're going to try and. Chair Khan was contemplating expanding that rule. I don't think you're going to see that, but I think you're going to see I know that there's a lot of activity in that because we're involved in some of those cases, and we've seen some of the ones that have been announced already. So that's an area of direct-to-consumer marketing where I think if you're teaching people how to make money, whether it's for sale on Amazon or real estate or publishing or whatever, they're looking at a lot of areas in that, and I think that's one area that they're devoting some significant resources.
That is interesting, and it is kind of funny. You touched on that at the top of the webcast, Len, where it seems to be somewhat contradictory to maybe traditional, Republican, conservative values. If, you've got someone who's teaching someone else how to make money on Amazon, but that's now coming under scrutiny. That's a pretty interesting dichotomy. I can understand why you said at first the big headline is actually a question mark.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, it's also unpredictable, right? I mean,
yeah.
Where they latch on, I think like they'll really dig in. It's just trying to figure out where they latch on. There's always a randomness. I have to have these conversations with clients like, well, why are they looking at me and not at him? And
well, I think that is what I think a lot of people are looking for. It's really not the who, it's the why, right? The why of a policy, the why of a certain direction. And if that's uncertain, that really causes a lot of, I think, confusion and uncertainty for everybody, where they might not know where they want to go. What we do think, though, clearly there's been some messages or some shots fired, is kind of a running theme of suspicion of big tech.
Yes.
So if you could talk to me and talk to the audience about the posture of the administration in front of Meta, Google, Amazon, and Apple, which seems to be somewhat confrontational, but is also interesting because the leaders of Meta, Google, Amazon, and Apple were all at the inauguration ball and the like. So there's a personal invitation there, but a posture towards the businesses. Am I reading that right?
It's fascinating. It's like a novel. I mean, the intercrossing relationships and the whole relationship with Elon Musk and others. So under the Khan administration, several antitrust cases were brought against big tech, and this administration is continuing to press ahead with them. They held a workshop last week or the week before about how big tech harms children. I mean, that was essentially the title of the workshop. So there is certainly some hostility there. There's been announcements that they're looking at whether the platforms or the large advertisers on the platforms may collude to exclude conservative views. And that's been a big issue for MAGA regarding whether big tech sort of discriminates against people who are expressing their views. So all of that is continuing. They haven't brought any new cases. Well, they brought a case against Uber. I don't know if that counts as big tech, but that was sort of pretty traditional consumer protection issues. What they actually do, I think, like a lot of things, remains to be seen. Those entities, they're in litigation constantly with the government already, so they're not scared of it. And we'll have to see where exactly the administration decides to put its enforcement resources against those guys. Additionally,
so I guess one thing, because you had mentioned Khan from the previous administration, they clearly had some high-profile cases, with some mixed success. There's a different vision and approach. As someone in the industry who, works above, kind of outside of administrations, right? I mean, you see administrations come and go. What are you seeing as the big sea change or shift that is demonstrable between one administration and the next, and this one?
Yeah, so it's more so far in what they have said rather than what they have done. I mean,
Interesting.
Chair Ferguson has talked a lot about his experience as a litigator and how he's only going to bring strong cases, and he's got sort of the litigator's practicality in settling cases as well. And that was probably more on the antitrust side, but that should translate as well to the consumer protection side. Under the Khan administration, I think sometimes they brought cases they knew they might lose to make a point. Use litigation as a bully pulpit.
Okay.
At least based on the things that Chairman Ferguson has said, that's not going to be the way his FTC operates. We'll see if that's actually the case. But that's a pretty big difference in approach, and it actually reflects their backgrounds. I mean, Lena Khan was a law school professor, sort of making academic arguments in some ways. Ferguson was a lawyer. I mean, he was a solicitor for the state. I mean, he was the person who represented the state in court, especially in appellate matters. So that difference in their work history should be reflected in the way they approach things, and it's certainly the way they've said they're going to approach things. Mm-hmm. We'll see what really happens.
Then what I find so fascinating about that is that these are administration positions that have material impact on the industry, on the performance marketing industry. Absolutely. And in people's lives and businesses, right? It's real material impact. but in the end of the day, they're people.
Yeah.
You had just mentioned that Khan was a law professor. She comes at it from an esoteric, theory-based idea of maybe making a case and a point, whereas Ferguson is really kind of a brass tacks litigator, only going after the cases that he can win, perhaps. But in the end of the day, you know, they are their people, and it's the personalities that kind of move and shape this. But like I said, those people have material impact on the industry itself.
Yep.
So recently there's been click to cancel, some non-compete, and some other rulings. Can you give us some details on the changing perspective and how you think this is going to affect the performance marketing in the ecosystem?
Sure, and I think click to cancel might be the best example. You know, under Chair Khan, a rule was promulgated. There was some Republican dissent when that was published. And if you had asked me before January 20th what I thought was going to happen to that rule, I would have thought that the new administration would have sort of abandoned it. You know, it was subject to challenge in the 8th Circuit, either, you know, withdraw it or not defend it. And the contrary, they vigorously defended it in the 8th Circuit. They have postponed the effective date for the second half of the rule, but and they said they might evaluate it. Now, very recently, a resolution was introduced in Congress to repeal the rule. There's a mechanism called the Congressional Review Act where Congress can repeal within a certain time window rules that have been promulgated. And there's now a joint resolution to repeal the click to cancel rule. There's also talk in the industry that there may be efforts to reopen the rulemaking to either scale it back or to remove certain provisions of the rule. We'll see if that happens, but you know, there's still a lot of talk. It's not clear exactly what's going to happen, but that's, you know, the rules so far is, you know, still going forward, and the commission is continuing to interpret ROSCA very aggressively as to what it can cover, and it's really important. There's in both the click to cancel rule and in ROSCA, there's a provision that governs misrepresentations generally, not just misrepresentations regarding the negative option or the continuity aspect, but about the product being sold generally. Oh. And if the FTC prevails on those kinds of claims, they get additional remedies. You know, after the Supreme Court's decision in the AMG case, the FTC lost the ability to get monetary relief for violations of Section 5. But for violations of ROSCA, they can get monetary relief. They can get restitution within a 3-year window, and they can also refer the matter to the Justice Department for significant civil penalties. So, if they keep enforcing ROSCA that way, and if the click to cancel rule continues to have that provision, they continue to use that. It's a powerful tool in the FTC's arsenal that, you know, they sort of lost after the AMG case. So I think how they deal with that will be a real sort of weather vane for which way the wind's blowing on enforcement.
Yeah, you know, I was going to ask you that about what cases might give you a taste or a hint, or like you said, some type of certainty about where the direction might be with these cases. And so you totally answered that question before I even asked, which is awesome. And it seems to me, though, and please correct me if I'm wrong, and if this question lands poorly, Len, please forgive me. There's a lot of things that you can't control and that Venable can't control. I guess my question for you, Len, with your clients and with Venable, what can you control? What can you do?
Well, I think it's a significant mistake to assume that because, you know, it's a Republican administration and there's this anti-regulatory rhetoric, that it's safe to sort of abandon compliance and that there's relatively low risk. That's just not true for a couple of reasons. First off, the FTC is continuing to bring cases. I mean, the agency will have shrunk, but they'll still be there. And it appears that if they come after you, they're going to come after you hard. You've also got the states, which are very, very aggressive on negative option marketing, on junk fees, on environmental claims. And you've also got the class action bar, which is relentless and looking for, you know, technical violations of statutes and trying to bring them as class actions. And those become very expensive to resolve, whether through settlement or litigation. So I think it would be a real mistake, and this is something you can control to sort of go soft on compliance now.
Right.
You know, I try and tell people it's not how much money you make, it's how much money you get to keep in the long term. And you know, if you're being sort of lax on compliance, you may be essentially borrowing money from either the state or the plaintiff's bar, or in certain instances the FTC, because ultimately you're going to have to give that back with interest. So
right.
you know, I just
no one wants to go through that. I love that approach, Len, because that way you can say, yeah, it's a new administration, but what you can do to your clients is say, guys, this doesn't change anything in terms of paying attention to compliance.
Yeah, still a lot of risk out there.
That's excellent. That's an excellent answer. Well, as always, these conversations fly by. You've been amazing. Tom, do we have any questions from the audience? It's already 11:25.
We do. We have three, I think, pretty good ones. The first one is not necessarily in the regulatory arena, but it's something that's very interesting to all marketers. I think Len might have an opinion here. What do you make of the TikTok situation, where it's been reported that Trump will again extend the deadline? What should marketers using TikTok be prepared for here?
It is predictably unpredictable. I mean, it's funny. I mean, TikTok is about 5 floors below me in our New York office. I mean, we share an elevator back. I see those folks every day. I don't know. I suspect he is going to. I mean, this is Len. I have no inside information on this. I do suspect he's going to extend that. But I think you'd be wise to have a plan B.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear. You got to be ready for any eventuality, right? So, yep. If you could offer a golden nugget of advice to us for and brands to avoid scrutiny from the FTC under this administration, do you have one? What would it be?
The folks who are leading the administration keep talking about, you know, consumer harm. So how does the FTC try and figure out where consumer harm is? Well, they look at the complaints that come into their Consumer Sentinel database. Those are often complaints that have also gone to BBB. So it's the same advice I've given for 20 years probably, is that you know, pay attention to what's going on in your consumer response center. If consumers are calling in frequently about why am I getting charged for this, or I thought I was paying $5, not $15, or you know, you told me this stuff was going to be here on the 12th and it got there on the 25th, and you're seeing those kinds of repeating issues, you need to do something. You can't wait for the FTC to come knocking to start addressing those things, because you know, the ounce of prevention worth a pound of cure is really true. And you know, sort of looking at what you're hearing in your consumer response center, what you're seeing in, you know, gripe sites or on the BBB websites, is really important business intelligence that you should be using to make decisions and allocate resources, so that little problems don't become big problems, and you don't have to hire someone like me to fight with the FTC to try and get you know, to get past these things.
That's good. That's good stuff. Last one. And this touches back on an area you guys talked about earlier, with the proposed staffing cuts, self-proposed staffing cuts. Even if the FTC is committed to upholding the law, what's the reality of how much work they can actually get done?
There was an enormous amount of time being spent on rulemaking under Lina Khan. All that effort has stopped. Those people have been reassigned. So I think part of, if you ask Chairman Ferguson that, I think he would say, you know, sort of on enforcement issues, we're not really going to have fewer cops on the beat. I'm not sure that's true, but you know, we'll see. The losses at the senior leadership level, we'll see how they fill that. But you know, you've got a chairman and a bureau director who neither of whom worked at the agency before. Usually when you have those kinds of situations, there's a lot of reliance on the senior staff of the agency to make the trains run on time, to get things done, and who know why things are done certain ways. That there's been a lot of loss there. And my observation, at least the couple of months we've now been operating under this regime, is that things are moving a little bit more slowly. And I attribute that to the changes at senior staff level, or the upcoming changes at senior staff level. I think that the challenge for Chairman Ferguson is going to be getting personnel enthused and motivated. There's been a lot of people that have left, a lot of people that are looking to leave, and this is not just the FTC, this is, in a lot of places in government. And I think, the biggest challenge for him is going to be getting the people who are there to work hard and be motivated. When I went from private practice to the FTC and then back to private practice, one of the things you notice is, in a law firm, it's not that hard to fire somebody. It's not easy, but it's not that hard. And if people are doing a good job, you reward them, not just with praise, but with dollars.
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible to fire someone at the federal government level, or pretty close to it. And you don't have a big bag of money to throw at people to reward them. So you've got to motivate them and reward them through softer tools, through encouragement, through recognition, through sort of more emotional leadership. And that's going to be his challenge, I think. It's going to be, and Chris McFarridge's as well. You need someone who's really going to sort of fire up the troops.
Well, great. Thanks, Len.
Fantastic.
Great answer. It's going to be interesting to watch it unfold and see where it heads. Hopefully our members and our followers and the folks who rely on us for information can remain safe and doing good business out there. And
that would be good.
Yep, and if you're
Len, you're the only one who wants to say, "Don't give me a call."
Call me.
You're the only one in the industry.
If you don't listen to me, when you get in trouble, then give me a call.
Hey guys, thank you very much, Chris, Len. Thank you so much for the great conversation. For those of you watching, you can tell your cohorts that they'll be able to see it on YouTube within the next few days. And we'll take it from there. Our next episode of Take 20 is set for next Wednesday, a week from today, June 25th, when we'll host a group of PDMI council members for our 4th annual summer reading list episode. It's always a fan favorite, a little lighter fare than the FTC stuff today, so should be good. But please visit thepdmi.com/take-20 to register for the webinar and check out the upcoming schedule. Additionally, classes in session at PDMI University, the association's online continuing education program for performance and D2C marketing professionals. In fact, we have 2 instructors at PDMIU on this, Len and Chris, both instructors. 4 of an eventual 10 courses are all about performance and D2C marketing topics are available for prospective students now. The full range of 10 courses is available for just $395 for PDMI members and $595 for non-members. For more information, visit thepdmi.com/university. Last but not least, online registration for PDMI West in San Diego is open. Badges are priced at just $395 for members and $595 for non-members, $100 discount from on-site registration, and badge holders get first crack at discounted hotel rooms at the Intercontinental San Diego. Visit thepdmi.com/PDMI-West to find out more and get your badge now. Thanks again for checking out this episode of the Take 20. Chris, Len, thank you for being here. Be well, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Great job, Chris.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Len. Appreciate it.